Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is H.R. McMaster. He served as National Security Advisor to President Donald Trump from March 2017 until April 2018. The retired Lieutenant General just published a book called Battlegrounds, The Fight to Defend the Free World. He's now a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution in California, where he joins us from. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Mark, thank you for having me.
Donald Trump has refused to accept the result from the presidential election held on November the 3rd. He's asked his attorney general to fight it and hinted that he may not peacefully transfer power on January the 20th. Just from a national security standpoint, what's your reaction?
Mark, we shouldn't worry about it at all. The founders of our country tried to think about what could go wrong and prevent it from happening. So our Constitution stipulates that the executive branch, the president, has no say in a transition. Of course, the American people do with their votes, but then the election, if it's to be adjudicated, is done through the judicial system. And if it's, if there aren't enough electoral votes, it goes to Congress. But certainly that's not the case here. So I don't think anyone should be concerned about it at all.
Right. Nevertheless, this Monday, President Trump fired his defense secretary, Mark Esper. The administration is also withholding the formal authorization to the Biden transition team to begin its work, including getting money, but also highly classified intelligence documents. Doesn't that send a message?
Well, you hope that there's going to be a smooth transition, and I can't imagine that across our departments and agencies of our government that the door won't be open, because what Americans want is they want the elected president to succeed. And so I think that across our government there'll be a great deal of work on the transition, and there'll be a high degree of continuity, a much higher degree of continuity in foreign policy than I think most people expect.
Right. But aren't you concerned about the attitude of Donald Trump? He conveyed the message that the election was rigged, that he wouldn't accept his defeat. And obviously, this raises questions about what other countries might be thinking, including countries like Russia. Vladimir Putin must be smiling nowadays.
Absolutely. I am very concerned about it. I mean, the president should make clear that our elections are secure, which they are, and help build confidence in our democratic principles and institutions and processes. And as you know, and what I write about in Battlegrounds is what Putin wants. Putin wants to sow doubts and shake our confidence in our democratic processes and institutions. And the president of the United States should not be one to help him do that.
But isn't Trump being what some would call a useful idiot for Vladimir Putin? The fact that he's saying the election was rigged, that he's questioning the democratic process, isn't this real concern for someone like you?
Well, it is a concern whenever a leader compromises principle to score partisan political points. That's what the president's doing, and no leader should do that. I tell the story in Battlegrounds about the election in 2016 when both parties compromised principles and made it easy for Putin to undermine the election, but really to sow doubts about the result. That's what the Russians want to do, is they want a large number of Americans to doubt the legitimacy of the process. And no leader, including the president, should help Vladimir Putin do that.
But that's what he's doing, right?
I think so. I mean, I think that the rhetoric around the security of the election has been completely inaccurate. Our election process is extremely secure. And what's strange about this is that President Trump made a lot of those improvements under his administration, and he should just take credit for it. Our election process is extremely secure.
Right. In your book, you say immediately in the preface that you're not there to dish dirt, essentially, on Donald Trump, unlike other former officials. But you've advocated a tough line on Russia. Now, in retrospect, did you ever have any doubts about Trump's commitment. There's been a lot of talk about his relationship with Vladimir Putin. Do you believe that there's still a doubt, a question mark on this issue?
Well, the story that I tell in Battlegrounds is that 3 separate administrations tried to have a better relationship with Vladimir Putin. George W. Bush looked into Putin's soul. Remember that Secretary Hillary Clinton in the Obama administration brought a reset button to Lavrov in Geneva. And President Trump keeps saying, well, wouldn't it be great to have a better relationship with Putin? But the story I tell in Battlegrounds is we're not going to have a better relationship with Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin is driven mainly by a sense of honor lost after the collapse of the Soviet Union and what he perceived as the loss of in the Cold War, and Putin is driven to restore Russia to national greatness, mainly by dragging all of us down in Europe and in the United States. So the story that I tell in Battlegrounds is a story of don't expect a better relationship with Vladimir Putin.
Right. You also talk about, I would say, some have described as the transactional diplomacy of Donald Trump. You say you give him some credit for getting tougher on China, but you say essentially that the fact that he wanted to develop this relationship with Xi Jinping was a problem, just as he tried with North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un to make it very personal. You said this was essentially wrong, that it didn't help the U.S. position.
Well, I think on China, I don't mind the relationship with Xi Jinping as long as the policy is to compete with the aggressive policies of the Chinese Communist Party. And I think what the Trump administration did that was most positive in foreign policy was effect a shift in our approach to China. And I think it's the most significant shift in U.S. foreign policy since the end of the Cold War, and it was long overdue. With Kim Jong-un, the main concern is that this apparently warm relationship with Kim Jong-un alleviated some of the pressure on the North Korean regime and may have undermined to a certain extent this campaign of maximum pressure, which is designed to convince Kim Jong-un that he's safer without the weapons than he is with them.
Right. I mean, was this one of the reasons why you left the White House, this thing that Trump's love letters, as he called them, with Kim Jong-un was not a good way to go about?
No, I left before the love letters. So I left in April of 2017, just when the president had made the decision for the first summit, which I thought, hey, why not give it a shot, right? Everything toward North Korea, the approach to North Korea had been bottom up, right? So why not try a top-down approach and see what happens, as long as that maximum pressure stays in place? And I think what was positive about these summits is that after the Hanoi summit, there was no relaxation of sanctions. And that summit was portrayed as a failure, but I think it was actually a success for all of us who are concerned about the North Korean regime having the most destructive weapons on earth.
Right. Speaking of those weapons, and that's the last issue I'd like to broach with you, the Iran nuclear deal, obviously Trump pulled out of it. Let's say, incoming Biden administration has hinted that it could go back to the negotiating table. Do you think that's wise because Trump didn't go anywhere with Iran?
Well, I think if they can negotiate a better agreement and if they can keep sanctions in place against the Iranian regime for its 4-decade-long proxy war it's been waging against us. So I think it's really important in the approach to Iran to not only block all paths to a nuclear weapon, but also to not give the regime the resources it could use to continue to perpetuate this humanitarian catastrophe across the greater Middle East and to remain the greatest state sponsor of terrorist organizations.
Right. Do you think the Biden administration will be realistic, or do you fear they might be a bit naive?
I think they'll be realistic, but I just hope that they resist the temptation to define their foreign policy mainly as in opposition to the Trump foreign policy. And they correct deficiencies that they view, but also they continue the aspects of the Trump foreign policy that were positive. And I think that's especially in connection with China and the increasing aggression by the Chinese Communist Party, which I think really highlights that China. This is not a China-U.S. problem. It is a China-free world problem.
A new Cold War.
Well, not exactly like the Cold War, but it has to be a competition. If you just look at how China is aggressively pursuing its interests at our expense. If the Chinese Communist Party succeeds, the world will be less free, less prosperous, and less safe.
H.R. McMaster, that's all we have time for. I want to thank you very much for being with us here on the France 24 interview.
France 24, c'est la richesse de la diversité culturelle mondiale avec un réseau de correspondants à travers la planète.
En France 24 en español comunicamos a Latinoamérica con el mundo entero.
روح مهنية شعارها واحد حرية التعبير. هذه هي بصمة France 24.
Africa on France 24 is about its people and their stories.
Los ciudadanos nos cuentan cuáles son las iniciativas y las problemáticas que tienen en sus comunidades a través del programa Los Observadores. Eso los acerca aún más a France 24.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.
Our reporters take us deep into the Amazon rainforest to the village of Kako, where the Hmong people arrived from Indochina 40 years ago.
Ici, on a trouvé notre terre, donc la Guyane française.
There was nothing when they arrived. Everything you see is down to their hard work. Roads, schools, homes, crops.
Ils nous font vivre la Guyane avec leurs plantations, avec leurs légumes, ce qui reste très important pour nous.
Once used as backup troops by the French in the Indochina War of the 1950s, the Hmong people have successfully integrated into Guyana's multi-ethnic society. Join us to discover these former refugees and their crucial role in their adopted homeland. In Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.